The Arizona sun had a way of punishing those who didn't belong. It didn't just burn the skin. It found its way into the bones, drying the spirit as it did the earth. Lady Eveline Harcourt had never known such a place existed. Back home in England, the horizon was soft, green, and polite. Here it stretched cruelly, a red wasteland beneath a sky too big for mercy. The wheels of the Duchess's carriage groaned as they cut through the dust. A silk parasol shielded her face, though the wind tore at it like an animal hungry for something finer. The driver, an old scout named Briggs, spat tobacco juice and muttered about Apache country. The word meant little to Eveline then, just another rumor from the frontier. But fate, like the desert, doesn't forgive ignorance. Her father had sent her to America with the hope that distance might cure her disobedience. The Duke of Harcourt was a man of old blood and cold manners. He had promised her hand to the Earl of Wexford, a man as pale and passionless as marble. Eveline had smiled through the announcements, the dinners, the congratulations, but inside she had felt herself dying a little more with each toast. So when the chance arose to visit her aunt in New Orleans and clear her thoughts, she had begged to travel by land, to see the frontier as gentlemen explorers do. The Duke, irritated but indulgent, had allowed it. Now, 2 weeks into that journey, she was lost. The ambush came in a blur of gunfire and screams. Bandits, half-starved men with sunburned faces and madness in their eyes, stormed from the canyon. Briggs fired twice before a bullet found his chest. The horses reared, the coach tipped, and Eveline was thrown into the sand. When she opened her eyes, the world was silent save for the whisper of wind through mesquite. Her dress was torn, her parasol gone, her throat dry as paper. She crawled toward the fallen coach, calling Briggs's name, but there was no answer. Only buzzards circled above. That's when she saw him. At first, he looked like part of the desert itself, tall, motionless, his skin bronzed by sun and war. His hair, black as obsidian, fell past his shoulders. Around his neck hung a necklace of bone and turquoise. He stood atop a ridge, bow in hand, eyes fixed on her with something between curiosity and sorrow. Eveline froze. Every story she'd heard of savages rushed to mind. Raids, scalps, atrocities whispered over brandy in London drawing rooms. She wanted to scream, to run, but her legs trembled too hard to obey. He descended the ridge in silence like a shadow sliding down the wall of the world. When he reached her, he didn't speak. He knelt beside Briggs's body, examined the wound, then turned to her. His voice, when it came, was deep, low as thunder before a storm. "You are not one of them." She could only stare. I don't understand." He looked past her, scanning the horizon. "Bandits," he said. "They will come back when sun dies." The meaning struck her like cold water. Then we must go. You must help me reach the fort." He didn't move. His gaze lingered on the gold embroidery of her torn dress, the pearls at her neck. To him, she must have looked like a creature from another planet. Then, without warning, he lifted her, effortlessly as though she weighed nothing, and began walking toward the hills. She protested at first, weakly.
"Put me down!"
"I command you to." But the heat, the shock, and his steady heart beneath her cheek lulled her into silence. They reached a canyon as night fell. He built a fire from dry brush, skinned a jackrabbit with practiced grace, and offered her meat roasted on a stick. She hesitated, and then hunger overpowered pride. When she whispered a thank you, he only nodded. "Eat. Tomorrow we walk east." She studied him through the flames. He was unlike any man she had known. Larger, quieter, his movements deliberate as though every action carried the weight of tradition. There was a scar across his left shoulder, and a tattoo of a hawk spread its wings over his chest. "What should I call you?" she asked at last. He didn't answer right away. His eyes were on the stars. "My people called me Taza once, but the white men gave me another name." "El Gigante," she blinked. "The giant?" A faint smile touched his lips. "It amuses them to name what they fear." A chill ran through her. "And should I fear you, El Gigante?" He looked at her then, really looked, and the intensity of it made her breath hitch. "If I meant to harm you, Duchess," he said quietly, "you would already be bones in the sand." Her heart thudded painfully. "Then why save me?" He turned back to the fire. "Because the desert has taken enough." That night, Eveline lay awake listening to the wind moan across the canyon walls. The fire's glow danced over his face, and proud, solemn, carved from stone. She thought of the ballroom in London, of chandeliers and champagne and the endless parade of suitors who spoke to her like she was a prize to be displayed. None of them had looked at her the way this man did, as if she were made of flesh, not porcelain. When dawn came, he woke her with a wordless gesture. They walked for hours across red earth that shimmered like iron. He carried a canteen and gave her water before he drank himself. Once she stumbled and he caught her arm, his touch firm but careful as if afraid to break her. By the third day, the canyon walls grew narrow and the air cooler. She began to understand bits of his silence, the way his eyes scanned every shadow, the reverence with which he touched the ground before sleeping, the sadness that seemed to follow him like a ghost. At sunset, he finally spoke again. "You are far from your people, Duchess," she smiled faintly. "Perhaps not far enough." He studied her face and the honesty in her tone and nodded, as if recognizing something kindred. That night, as the stars blazed above them like scattered silver, Eveline thought, maybe the desert isn't punishment. Maybe it's a test. And as she drifted to sleep beside the dying fire, she realized something she'd never dared admit to herself before, that she wasn't afraid of the wilderness. She was afraid of what she might become if she learned to love it. And at the heart of that wilderness, silent and unshakable as a mountain, stood the man who had pulled her from death and carried her into a world she didn't yet understand. El Gigante, the Apache who would change her fate. For 3 days, the desert had been their only witness, to hunger, to silence, to something unnamed that grew between them. Eveline had thought she understood loneliness before, in the echoing halls of Harcourt Manor, with her mother's perfume fading and her father's voice filling rooms colder than the marble floors. But out here, loneliness was alive. It had a sound, the sigh of wind through cacti, the whisper of sand slipping down a slope. It had a smell, dust, leather, and smoke, yet somehow she didn't feel alone anymore. El Gigante walked ahead, his long strides steady, his body built for endurance rather than comfort. The sun had turned his skin to burnished copper. The muscles in his back flexed with every step, smooth and silent as the coils of a mountain cat. Eveline followed as best she could, clutching her torn skirts. The land before them rolled in shades of ochre and gold. Every now and then a hawk circled overhead, and Taza, for she preferred to think of him by his Apache name, would glance up, murmuring something in his native tongue. "What are you saying?" she asked one afternoon when curiosity overcame exhaustion. He didn't look at her. "A prayer. For what?" "For guidance."
For forgiveness.
"For rain." She smiled faintly. "Does the desert ever answer?" He paused and turned toward her. His eyes caught the light, dark, steady, unreadable. "Always. But sometimes the answer is no." They walked on in silence after that, though Eveline found herself glancing at him often, not just for direction, but for something else. Safety, certainty. Even when he spoke little, she could feel the gravity of his presence. By the time they reached a cluster of rocky hills that evening, her legs trembled and her throat ached. He stopped, studied her face and motioned for her to sit beneath a ledge. "You are not made for this land," he said. She bristled, half laughing. "You think I don't know that? I think you want to prove that you are." His voice wasn't mocking. It was quiet, thoughtful. And somehow that stung more. She turned her face away, watching the sunset burn across the horizon. "I suppose I've spent my whole life trying to prove something." He waited. "That I'm not fragile," she went on softly. "Not just another pretty name on my father's guest list." Taza crouched beside the fire he'd built. "Then perhaps this is where you belong," he said. "Out here no one cares for names. Only strength." Eveline looked at him, unsure whether he was teasing or sincere, but his face gave nothing away. When night fell, he showed her how to listen for snakes, how to tell the call of a coyote from that of a wolf, how to find water in a dry riverbed by watching where the moths flew at dusk. She marveled at the precision of his movements, each gesture simple, efficient, born of a life lived close to the earth. In return, she shared what little of her world made sense to him. She spoke of London fogs and opera houses, of silver spoons and servants who never looked their masters in the eye. He listened, silent, his gaze far away. "Your world," he said at last, "has too many walls." "And yours?" she asked. He smiled faintly. Mine had too much blood. It was the first time she'd seen emotion flicker in his eyes. Pain, deep and old. She hesitated, then asked, "You said your people called you Taza. Why the past tense?" His jaw tightened. "Because most of them are gone." He told her then, in short, rough words, of soldiers who had burned his village, of families taken to reservations, of how he had escaped only to become a hunted man. "They called me El Gigante because I would not kneel," he said. "They say I'm a ghost now, a curse in the hills." Maybe they are right. Eveline's throat ached. "I don't believe you're a curse." He looked at her, and for a moment something raw and almost tender flickered across his face. "You do not know what I've done. I know what you've saved," she whispered. The fire cracked between them. Neither spoke for a long time. The desert night wrapped them in its cold arms, and the stars looked close enough to touch. In that silence, something shifted, a thread of understanding binding two people who should have been enemies, yet weren't. The next morning he woke her before dawn. "We travel fast today," he said. "There is a trading post 2 days from here. You can find white men there. Safety." Her heart twisted unexpectedly. "And you?" "I go another way." She didn't answer. She couldn't. They rode through the canyons on a half-wild Mustang he'd caught and broken the day before. Eveline clung to his waist, the heat of his back against her palms. The rhythm of the horse beneath them seemed to fuse with the beating of her own heart. At midday, they rested by a stream. Eveline knelt to wash her face, the cold water biting her skin. When she looked up, she found him watching her, not with lust, but with quiet awe, as if he couldn't quite understand what she was made of. "You are not weak?" he said suddenly. She smiled. "You sound surprised." "I was," he admitted. "At first." There was a stillness between them then, heavy, sweet, dangerous. Eveline broke it with a nervous laugh. "You're not like the stories say, you know. About Apaches." He raised a brow. "What do they say?" "That you're savage, cruel, heartless." His gaze darkened, though his voice stayed calm. "Perhaps they only fear what they cannot control." Her chest tightened. "Like me." He looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time he smiled. Not the faint, guarded smirk she'd seen before, but a real smile, warm and startling. "Yes," he said softly. "Like you." That night they camped at the edge of a vast mesa. The stars were so bright it hurt to look at them. Eveline wrapped herself in his spare blanket, breathing in the faint scent of smoke and sage. "Taza," she murmured. He turned toward her, his face half-shadowed by moonlight. "What will you do after you leave me at the trading post?" "Keep moving," he said. "A man like me does not stop." "You could," she whispered. "You could come east. There are places where no one would know." He shook his head. "Your world would never let me stay." Her throat ached. "Maybe it's not my world I want anymore." He said nothing, but she saw the flicker of emotion, desire, conflict, fear, all warring in his dark eyes. Finally, he stood, walked to where she sat, and crouched beside her. "Sleep now," he said gently. "Tomorrow you go back to your people." She looked up at him, her breath shallow. "And if I don't want to?" He hesitated, then reached out, brushed a strand of hair from her face, his fingers trembling just enough for her to notice. "You should," he said. "Because if you stay, you will forget who you were." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Maybe that's what I want." He drew back then, standing tall against the starlit sky. She couldn't see his expression, but his voice was low, rough, certain. "The desert changes everyone, Duchess, but it never gives anything for free." As he turned away, Eveline lay awake, watching his silhouette against the horizon, broad, proud, untamed, and knew the truth. The desert had already changed her. And so had he. The desert night had a way of swallowing time. Under the endless canopy of stars, Eveline forgot what day it was, how far they'd traveled, and even who she'd been before the dust took hold of her hair and the sun-burned color into her skin. All she knew was the steady rhythm of El Gigante's steps beside her and the strange peace that had settled in her chest, a peace that frightened her more than the loneliness ever had. They'd been traveling for nearly a week now, and though the trading post was close, neither seemed eager to reach it. The air between them had changed, heavier somehow, charged with something unspoken. That evening they camped beside a dried-up riverbed where the rocks still glowed faintly from the day's heat. Eveline helped gather brush, her fingers raw and blistered. She'd stopped complaining days ago. Somewhere along the way, she had become part of the wilderness, her soft hands now rough, her laughter quieter, her eyes sharper. Taza noticed, though he said little. He sat across from her, sharpening a hunting knife by firelight. Sparks danced between them. At last, she broke the silence. "You watch me like you're waiting for something." He looked up, one corner of his mouth lifting. "I'm waiting to see what you become." Her heart gave a sudden startled flutter. "And what do you think that will be?" He studied her a moment before answering. "Free." The word struck her deeper than she expected. Free. No one had ever said it to her before, not her father, not her fiancé, not anyone. It was as though he had peeled back the layers of her life and found the thing she'd buried most. She smiled faintly, staring into the flames. "Freedom isn't something a duchess can afford." "Then maybe you're not a duchess anymore," he said quietly. The fire popped. She glanced up. And in that instant, under the vast, merciless sky, the titles and manners of her old world seemed to burn away. Later that night, as the fire faded to embers, Eveline lay awake. The air was cool, the moon bright enough to turn the sand silver. She turned her head to where Taza sat, bare-chested, his profile etched in moonlight, a man carved from strength and silence. "Tell me," she said softly, "what it feels like to belong nowhere." He didn't answer at first. Then he said, "It feels like the wind. You go where it takes you. You leave no mark, but you see everything. Isn't that lonely?" He nodded once. "Sometimes." She watched him, the hard lines of his body softened by the glow of the moon. "And what would make you stay?" His gaze shifted to her, slow, deliberate, like a wolf measuring the distance between hunger and restraint. "A reason stronger than the wind." Her throat tightened. "And have you found one?" He didn't look away. "Maybe." The silence that followed was electric. The air between them hummed, charged with something she didn't yet dare name. Finally, he rose and walked toward her. The sand crunched beneath his boots. Eveline sat up, heart pounding, unsure whether to move or breathe. He stopped beside her bedroll, his shadow falling over her. "You are not afraid of me anymore," he said. "No," she whispered. "I was never afraid of you. Only of what I feel when you look at me." He crouched close enough that she could feel the warmth of his breath. His voice was low, rough and steady, the voice of a man used to command but tempered now by something gentler. "Then listen, Duchess," he said, his gaze locked with hers. "You will scream my name tonight, not in fear but because you will finally feel alive." Her breath caught. For a long moment, neither moved. The desert was utterly silent, the kind of silence that seemed to wait for something sacred. Eveline's heart hammered so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. "Do you always speak like that?" she whispered, his lips curved faintly. "Only when I mean it." She didn't know what possessed her then, the heat, the loneliness, the wild freedom of it all. But she reached up and touched his face. His skin was warm, rough beneath her fingers, and when he closed his eyes she felt a tremor run through him. "I don't know who I am anymore," she said, voice trembling. He leaned closer, his forehead resting against hers. "You're someone the desert is teaching to breathe." Then he kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was fierce, aching, full of everything they'd both been holding back, grief, longing, defiance. The kind of kiss that burned away fear. Her hands found his shoulders, the solid weight of him grounding her in the storm of her own awakening. The world around them vanished, no England, no blood, no duty. Just the sound of their breaths mingling with the wind. When they finally pulled apart, Eveline's cheeks were wet with tears she hadn't known she was crying. He brushed one away with his thumb. "Now you understand," he murmured. "Understand what?" she whispered. "That living is louder than fear." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "You speak like a poet." He smiled, and the rare, real smile she'd only seen once before. "No, poets dream of freedom. I've lived it." Later, they lay side by side, neither touching but close enough to feel each other's warmth. Eveline stared at the stars until her eyes blurred. "I never thought I'd see beauty here," she said quietly. "I thought the desert was only emptiness." He turned his head toward her. "Emptiness makes room for truth. And what truth have you found? That even the strongest man cannot fight what his heart wants." The words lingered between them. Eveline felt her chest tighten, a mixture of fear and joy and sorrow all tangled together. She wanted to say something, to ask if he meant her, but the moment was too fragile. Instead, she closed her eyes, letting the sound of his breathing carry her to sleep. When dawn broke, the air was cold and still. Eveline woke to find Taza already on his feet, staring toward the horizon. "What is it?" she asked. "Riders," he said simply. 2 days away, maybe less, soldiers. Her heart lurched. "Are they looking for you?" "Always." He turned, and for the first time she saw something like fear in his eyes, not for himself but for her. "They will take you back," he said. "And if they find me, they will kill me." Eveline stood, trembling. "Then we'll run." He shook his head. "You don't understand. If you run with me, you will lose everything." She took a step closer, chin lifting. "Then let me lose it." For a long time he said nothing. The sun crept higher, washing the desert in gold. Finally, he reached out, took her hand and pressed it to his chest, over the heartbeat she'd come to know so well. "You don't know what you're asking for," he said softly. "Yes," she whispered. "I do." His hand lingered over hers. Then he nodded once, as though sealing a silent pact. "Then we run," he said. And as the sun climbed over the red rocks, they turned toward the wild horizon. Not as savior and duchess, but as something new, something dangerous, two souls caught in a promise written in starlight. The morning broke hard and red, the kind of dawn that felt like a warning. Wind cut through the canyon, carrying the faint, distant echo of hooves. Taza's instincts were sharper than any man's. He didn't need to see them to know what was coming. "Soldiers," he said, low and certain. Eveline froze halfway through, packing their few belongings. "How close?" "Too close." He slung his rifle over his back and moved quickly, scanning the ridgelines. His every motion was fluid, practiced. Eveline followed his gaze, but she saw nothing. Just the vast emptiness of the desert, glowing gold under the newborn sun. "They're after you," she said quietly. He didn't answer. The silence was enough. She swallowed hard, forcing calm into her voice. "Then we go now." Taza turned to her, eyes dark with conflict. "You should not run with me. The soldiers will protect you." "I don't need protecting," she snapped, surprising even herself. "Not from you." He stepped closer, his presence steady as stone. "You don't understand. If they find you with me, they will call you traitor. They will take you back to your people, and they will bury this part of you, the part that breathes." Her voice trembled, but she didn't look away. "Then they'll have to kill me first." Something flickered in his eyes. Pride, sorrow, love, maybe all three. He nodded once, a warrior's acknowledgement. "Then we run together." By midday, they were deep in the canyons, the sun a white flame overhead. The desert shimmered around them, every rock and shadow alive with heat. They rode hard, the Mustang's hooves striking sparks from the stone. Eveline clung to Taza's waist, her hair whipping behind her, her heart pounding not with fear but fierce exhilaration. She had never felt so alive. Every now and then, he glanced back, his jaw tight, scanning the ridges. "They're tracking us," he muttered. "They know this land, but not like I do." They stopped only once to drink from a narrow stream hidden beneath an overhang. Eveline's lips were cracked, her throat raw. Taza handed her the canteen before drinking himself. Even in danger, his instinct was to give. "How long can we keep ahead of them?" she asked. "Until the sun sleeps," he said. "Then we disappear." "Disappear?" He met her gaze. "Into the storm." And as if summoned, the horizon darkened, clouds boiling up from the south, heavy with dust. The air grew thick, humming with the strange electricity that comes before a desert storm. Taza mounted the horse and pulled her up behind him. "Hold tight." Within minutes, the world turned to chaos. The wind hit like a fist. Sand tore at their faces, stinging eyes and skin. Eveline buried her face against his back, clinging to him as the horse stumbled through the storm. The sky went black, thunder rolling like cannon fire. They found shelter at last in a shallow cave near the canyon rim. Taza led the horse inside, then pulled Eveline close, shielding her with his body as the wind howled outside. When the storm finally began to die, the air was heavy and still. She looked up at him, his face streaked with dust and sweat, his hair wild, his eyes burning with fierce calm. "They'll lose our trail now," he said. "Then we're safe?" For a time, Eveline's chest ached with relief, and something more. She reached up, brushed sand from his cheek. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I've brought you more trouble than you deserve." He caught her hand, pressed it against his chest. "You didn't bring trouble, Duchess. You brought meaning." Her breath hitched. "Don't call me that, not anymore." He looked at her, eyes softening. "Then what should I call you?" She smiled faintly. "Eveline." He said her name as though tasting it. Slow, reverent, like a prayer. "Eveline." The sound of it made her heart stumble. For a long moment they stood in silence, close enough to feel the warmth of each other's breath. Then he stepped back, restless, pacing the narrow space like a caged wolf. "When the storm clears, you will go east," he said. "Follow the river until you reach the post." "And you?" He didn't answer. "Taza," she pressed, "what are you planning?" He turned toward her, and the look in his eyes made her throat tighten. "They will not stop hunting me. If I go east, they will find us both. If I go west, they will follow my trail and leave you be." Her stomach twisted. "No, you can't." He smiled sadly. "You told me once you wished to be free. Let me give you that." Eveline shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. "Freedom means nothing if I lose you." He stepped closer, brushed a hand down her cheek, his touch gentle as the desert wind. "You will not lose me," he said softly. "Not while the stars still burn." And before she could speak, he kissed her, hard, desperate, a promise written in the dust and thunder. At dawn, the storm had passed. The world outside the cave was washed clean, the red sand now streaked with silver from the rain. Taza saddled the horse, his movements quiet, deliberate. Eveline watched him, dread pooling in her chest. When he turned, she saw it, the decision already made in his eyes. "You're leaving," she whispered. He nodded once. "I will draw them away. You will go east when the sun climbs high." "No." She grabbed his arm, her voice breaking. "I won't let you walk into death." He looked down at her, his expression calm, but his eyes burning. "You once asked what would make me stay. This is it, you. But love cannot live if one of us dies running." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Then we'll die together." He smiled faintly. "No, Eveline. You must live. You must tell them we are not monsters." She sobbed, shaking her head. "They won't listen." "Then speak louder." He touched her face again, memorizing it with his fingers. The softness, the strength. Then he stepped back, mounted the horse, and for a heartbeat, the world held still. "Wait," she said hoarsely. "Tell me one thing before you go. What if I never see you again?" He looked at her, that long, unreadable look she'd come to crave. "Then remember what I said beneath the stars. Scream my name, Eveline. Scream it when you live, when you fight, when you breathe. That is how you will find me again." And before she could answer, he rode into the open desert, the rising sun casting his shadow long and golden across the sand. Hours later, she heard gunfire echo across the canyons, and sharp, distant, final, and she ran to the mouth of the cave, heart pounding, tears streaming down her dust-streaked face. The desert stretched silent and endless before her. The sound faded, leaving only wind and memory. She sank to her knees, whispering his name into the hot, still air. "Taza." The wind carried it away, a whisper, a prayer, a promise. And though she could not see him, she knew he was still out there, somewhere in that burning wilderness, her giant, her savior, her undoing. The sun rose over the desert like a wound reopening, It spilled red light across the canyons, over the stones still slick from the storm. The air smelled of gunpowder and rain. Evelyn walked barefoot through the sand, her fine shoes long gone, her gown torn and streaked with dust. Every step felt like walking through memory, every gust of wind whispering his name. For hours she searched the horizon, calling out into the emptiness. "Taza!" Her voice cracked, swallowed by the wide silence. There was no answer. Only the lonely cry of a hawk circling high above, its shadow sliding across the rocks like a ghost's hand. She found the first body near a dry wash. A soldier, his blue coat stiff with blood. A few yards beyond lay another. Then another. The tracks told the story. Taza had fought alone. When she found him, he was lying beside the horse, both still as the stones around them. For a heartbeat, she couldn't move. Her knees gave out and she fell beside him, clutching the earth. He wasn't dead, not yet. His chest rose shallowly, a slow, ragged rhythm that broke her heart with every breath. Blood darkened his side where a bullet had torn through. His face was streaked with dust and sweat, but his eyes, those eyes that had once looked through her like smoke, opened when he heard her voice. "Evelyn." She pressed her hands to the wound, sobbing. "Don't speak, please don't." He smiled faintly, the corners of his mouth trembling. "I told you to go east." "I couldn't," she choked out. "I can't go anywhere without you." He reached up, his hand shaking, and touched her face. "You came back." "Of course I did." She tried to laugh, but it came out a cry. "You saved me again and again." "Did you really think I'd let you die alone?" His thumb brushed a tear from her cheek. "The desert doesn't take pity," he whispered. "But it gave me one gift before it claimed me." Her voice broke. "Don't say that." He looked at her. And in that gaze was the weight of everything they'd never said. "You were the only thing I could never fight." Her tears fell freely now, hot and salt against his skin. "You fought the world, Taza. You could have fought this too." He smiled faintly. "Even giants must rest." She pressed her forehead to his, desperate to hold him here in this fragile, fleeting moment between life and death. "Please," she whispered, "stay. We can leave this place. I'll take you east. We'll disappear together. You promised we'd run." His breath hitched, soft, shallow, fading. "We did run," he murmured, "and I was free." Evelyn's heart shattered on the wind. "I can't do this without you." "You can." His voice was fading now like the last glow of firelight. "You're not a duchess anymore. You're part of this land now. You breathe because of it." Her lips trembled. "Because of you." He smiled one last time, that same rare, quiet smile that had changed everything. "Then breathe for both of us." And with that the wind stirred, lifting his dark hair across his face. And Taza, the giant Apache, the man who had carried her through fire and fear, was gone. For a long time Evelyn couldn't move. The world had gone still. Even the sun seemed to hang heavy in mourning. She buried him beneath the red rocks, where the wind sang low and soft through the canyons. She built a small cairn of stones, and with trembling hands she laid his necklace, the one of bone and turquoise, atop it. When she rose, she felt hollow, like the desert itself. The silence pressed against her chest until she could hardly breathe. Days turned to weeks. The soldiers never came back, and Evelyn never left. She built a small shelter near the canyon, a place of shade and quiet. The land fed her, roots, berries, rainwater. The desert taught her its rhythm, its patience. She learned to listen to the wind the way he had. Sometimes, at dusk, she'd swear she could still hear his voice in it, deep, steady, whispering her name. She stopped wearing silk, stopped answering to your grace. The woman who had once been the Duchess of Harcourt died out there with the man she loved. What remained was something else, stronger, fiercer, freer. Years passed. Travelers through the Arizona territory spoke of her. A pale woman with wild hair and eyes the color of storm clouds, living alone among the red cliffs. They called her La Fantasma Blanca, the white ghost. Some said she was mad. Others said she was waiting. One evening, a group of settlers came upon her near the river. She was kneeling beside a grave marked only by a simple carving on a flat stone. He made the Duchess breathe. They asked her what it meant, but she only smiled. That distant, haunting smile of someone who had loved so deeply that even grief had turned sacred. "The desert keeps its promises," she said softly. He said I'd scream his name, and I did. I still do, every night when the wind rises. The settlers left her then, uneasy but moved, and as they rode away they saw her standing alone against the sunset. Tall, unbowed, her skirts whipping in the wind. Behind her, the horizon burned gold and crimson, as if the earth itself still remembered him. That night, as the moon rose full and white, Eveline lay beside the grave, her hand resting over the stones. The wind sighed through the canyon carrying the scent of rain and mesquite. "Taza," she whispered, "if the desert truly listens, then let it take me when it's ready." A single gust brushed her cheek, gentle, familiar, and for the first time in many years, she felt peace. Her eyes closed. Her breathing slowed. And beneath the endless sky where stars glittered like silver tears, the Duchess finally rested. By morning, the wind had swept her footprints away. Only the grave remained, 2 names carved into stone by an unseen hand, side by side beneath the desert sun: Taza, El Gigante Apache Eveline Harcourt, the Duchess who breathed, and so the story ended where it began, under a sky too vast for sorrow, where love and loss were the same words spoken in 2 tongues. The desert, eternal and wild, kept their secret, that even in a world built on dust and war, love can still bloom like a stubborn flower in the sand.